Joining us on KSFO right now, a true conservative, a gentleman who serves us well as an assemblyman in Sacramento. And I know many of you really, really think the world of this guy. Chuck DeVore joins us on KSFO. Good morning, Mr. DeVore. How are you?
Good morning, Brian. I'm doing great, except for the fact that I've been reviewing the California budget situation, and I'll tell you, it's hard to find any good news in these sea of red ink that we have in this state, except for perhaps maybe we'll actually reform some government programs this year.
Well, that would be great, Assemblyman. I want to talk to you about that, and then in just a bit, I was able to hear you at the Eagle Forum Convention in Southern California, and I would love for you to share with us your thoughts on the California Air Resources Board in a moment, because that was astounding. But let's talk about this budget. Chuck DeVore, we are so upside down. How are we ever going to right this ship?
Well, it's very tough. This year we've pretty much exhausted all of our gimmicks and ledger domain and, switching from one account to another. And I think that we're facing what will likely be another epic budget standoff, similar to what we had in 2008, where we had the 88 days without a budget. I think that Republicans more than ever are realizing that tax increases are not the way to go, and of course the Democrats need a few of our votes to get the two-thirds in each house, unless they decide to pull a fast one on Prop 13 and just do a majority vote only tax increase. We have somewhere close to $19 to $20 billion that we have to make up out of roughly an $80 billion ongoing income. So it's a significant portion of our budget deficit. And we've got some pretty obvious areas that we need to reform. For example, with 1/8 of the nation's population, we have about 1/3 of the nation's welfare recipients in California.
Wow.
And this isn't entirely due to illegal immigration. It's mostly due to the fact that we have the most benefits, the most optional benefits. We're not very good at fraud enforcement. We're the only state in the union that never fully enforced the welfare to work 5-year rule, where if you're an able-bodied adult, you can only have 5 years of welfare. We always got exemptions for that, and as a result, a lot of folks came to California because we had the best deal. Now, if we simply enforce that, that would save maybe $1.5 billion a year. Obviously not a huge chunk of the $20 billion shortfall, but certainly enough to make a bit of a dent. The other area where we've been woefully inadequate is in our correction system. We're approaching $50,000 per prisoner to incarcerate.
Wow.
Per year, and of this, about $14,000 to $15,000 is due to health care. Most of that due to these federal mandates. We've had a 3-judge federal panel that's taken over mental health, regular, day-to-day health, dental health, etc., because Gray Davis and Governor Schwarzenegger didn't fight. They ended up signing these consent decrees saying that we were somehow engaging in an Eighth Amendment violation of cruel and unusual punishment by not providing adequate health care to our prisoners, when in fact our prison system had healthier prisoners by far than the national average, and prisoners actually were healthier than the average Californian out on the street. So despite this data, somehow we got under these crushing consent decrees that have increased the cost of our health care by almost a factor of 5 in only 10 years. Obviously, the solution would be somehow if we could get some of our prisoners shipped out to other states where it's less costly. If we just had the national average, Brian, we could save $5 billion a year just out of our prison system if it only cost us what the national average was to incarcerate.
Boy, you've just thrown out some shockers here. First of all, we have 1/8 of the United States population in California, and yet we have 1/3 of the welfare burden. And now you're telling me that's shocking enough. But now you're telling me that the average cost per inmate is $50,000 a year now. That's incredible.
It is incredible, especially given the national average is about $24,000.
Wow. Okay. Is anyone, other than you, Chuck DeVore, is anyone in Sacramento addressing these two issues? Because this has to change. This is not sustainable.
It is not sustainable. On the welfare front, of course, you had a little bit of progress last year where the legislature for the first time actually enacted some of Governor Schwarzenegger's modest reforms to reduce fraud and improve efficiency within the welfare system. These reforms that he had proposed year after year after year were always rejected by the Democrats as somehow being cruel on people who are receiving welfare, even though just about every other state does it. On the prison front, I'm part of a lawsuit to try to overturn these federal consent decrees. Just about every Republican that I'm aware of in the legislature is a party to this lawsuit to try to reopen the case and allow the legislature to reassume some control over management over our own prison system rather than having a three-judge panel increase the cost so much. Unfortunately, a lot of what you hear on the other side, and sadly even the governor, is just kind of this reaction of throwing up your hands and releasing inmates to save money by simply unleashing individuals who have not completed their sentences onto the public in California. And, of course, crime will go up. There will be murders and rapes as the result of this. People will be harmed. But it's a way of saving several $billion. So that's what you keep hearing on the other side. This is going to be a very difficult situation because a lot of prisoners' rights attorneys are suing to prevent us from transferring prisoners to lower-cost states. They somehow think that it's the right of the convicted felon to stay in California at $50,000 a year rather than be transferred to a place like Texas where they incarcerate for maybe about $21,000 a year.
This is amazing. Now, you haven't even begun to talk about the unfunded liabilities in this state from all of the state workers.
Those are multiple billions more. If you look at the unfunded liabilities for our pension and health care system, for our well taken care of, by and large, public sector employees, including our teachers, now you're talking, 60, 70, 80 billion dollars. By some estimates, even up to $300 to $400 billion of unfunded liability, depending on how many different layers of government and how you calculate it. The big problem here was that under Gray Davis in the late 1990s, 2000 timeframe, just before the dot-com bubble burst, our stock valuations for CalPERS, the retirement system, were so high that they were saying, look, we're overfunded for our retirement liability. Can't we increase the retirement for our public sector employees? So they increased it dramatically, basically retroactively giving them a grant of public monies, which may in fact be illegal, and that may be a way of overturning it if you listen to Dr. John Eastman, one of the candidates for state attorney general, who has hypothesized that this was an illegal grant of public funds. So when that happened, as soon as they granted those rich retirement rewards, the dot-com bubble burst. And then all of a sudden we had this enormous liability because the stock valuations plunged, and at the same time our obligations to provide a very nice retirement to our public sector employees spiked. And now we're still living with those consequences, and of course the public has to make good on that promise unless Dr. John Eastman's legal theory is correct that this was an illegal retroactive grant of public funds.